these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
So we're back. Welcome back, everyone. And we have a repeat offender here, Dr. Michelle Foss. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
So you're here because you testified today in front of our subcommittee on environment and critical minerals. Mm-hmm. And this was mostly focused on critical minerals because that's your background. So for everyone who's listening, Michelle Foss is a Ph.D. And fellow in energy, minerals, and materials at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy in the Houston area, of course. And this is a long bio, but like 40 years of experience in energy, whether that's oil, gas, LNG, electric, environmental research, consulting, investment banking, and just all of the above. So, I mean, we were talking today in the committee about really America's future and access to critical minerals. Critical minerals are kind of important for everything, and it does get into an environmentalist question of like, you know, what's the future of our energy production look like, and that's of course the perpetual debate up here and throughout the world is grand transition to renewables, but then maybe picking apart what that means in terms of the materials required. And so I think it was a good hearing from that aspect. And you know, the genesis of this podcast was to turn those 5-minute discussions into hour-long discussions. It doesn't have to be an hour today, but into longer, more substantive discussions. So appreciate you last minute just accepting another conversation with us. So what was your takeaway from today's hearing? Just generally speaking.
I thought y'all did a good job. I thought kudos to the subcommittee staff, because I think they did a good job researching and prepping and all of that sort of stuff. So I think they fed y'all good information, and your own take on things was really interesting to see. The level of concern, gaps, the knowledge gaps, that's what we're always kind of looking for.
Yeah. What
is it that people think that they know about all of this? Like, what never came up? Critical. What does that even mean? Why do we use that word? What's a critical mineral? I actually think hydrocarbons are critical minerals because they're critical for everything. What do we mean? The official definition is it's something that we actually rely on someone else for. Huh. And then increasingly what people are doing is using critical and strategic together, because there's a lot of stuff that we rely on a lot of people for, but does it all matter?
Yeah.
So the really important stuff is both critical and strategic.
I think we talk about critical minerals and rare earth minerals often in the same sentence.
And we do that too. And rare earths are a tiny little category.
I guess they can be the same thing, but they're not necessarily.
Well, they're critical because while we have them, it's complicated. We have a facility that extracts rare earths, but we don't process it here because they contain radioactive materials that we don't like dealing with. This has been an issue for this facility for a long time. Mountain Pass in California has a long history. And so what we do is we extract something like 38,000 tons of rare earth material. It goes to China, and we bring it back in the form of a lot of stuff that we don't make here, like magnets and things that go into geospatial devices and electronics of all sorts and all of that.
Around the world, like where are the best places to actually, let's forget about all the regulatory issues that we of course talked about in the subcommittee and we'll talk about today, but if you just took a geological look at the earth, where's the best bang for your buck when it comes to extracting everything from critical minerals to I guess normal minerals like copper and steel or iron to make steel, et cetera?
It depends. Do you want me to call you Dan, Representative Crenshaw? Whatever. I don't remember what we normally used before, but
Your Honor.
Your Honor. That's great. Every one of these things is different, and they have different occurrences. Some of them are in soft rock, it's relatively easy to move. Some of it is really hard rock, some of it's underground. But generally speaking, all of this stuff comes ultimately from volcanic and igneous activity, right? Something causes the metals to drop out, of the Earth's crust. So we look for places where you've had that. So places that, where you've had a lot of tectonic activity, earth movement, volcanoes, various things over time, millennia, left a lot of copper in Chile and Peru, for instance. All of the region around the Urals mountains in Russia left huge deposits of nickel and platinum and, all of that. We have this belt around the world of low-grade stuff. It's iron-rich. The technical name is laterite. People talk about red muds, if you've ever heard that phrase. Iron-rich, nickel-rich, bauxite-rich. And we get iron and nickel and aluminum and all of that from all of that. It's like digging dirt, So it depends on what you're looking for.
Well, I guess the basis of my question is geopolitical. I mean, are we resource rich in North America? Are our allies resource rich? And when we talk about China being, the main producer of these things, I think we have to unpack that, right? Because I'm under the understanding that they're not exactly resource rich in China. They've just cornered the market on the chemical processing required.
So like I said in the hearing today, out of their own backyard, out of their own domestic resource base, the Chinese contribute around 45% of global total mined tonnage of everything. Industrial materials, iron-rich materials, materials that aren't associated with iron, but like copper and cobalt.
That means it comes out of their ground?
Comes out of their own ground.
Okay, got it.
Out of their own ground.
So that's a pretty significant amount.
It's very significant.
So they're not resource poor?
No, they're not resource poor. A lot of the stuff that they have is actually not that great, and some of it's on the old side because the Chinese have, just like other cultures in Asia, have extracted metals and used metals for a long time. I mean, they're great metalsmiths, right? I mean, it's part of the heritage. But they're not afraid to get it. So the difference between us and them, really, when you look at the past 15 years or so, is their market power has grown and they've produced more, and everything else is they have been willing to extract and then do all the processing and everything else, whereas we, over the same time frame, have just continued to.
Was there a time when we did a lot of processing ourselves?
World War II, we had to. We supplied the world. So part of our problem is that a lot of our sort of go-to stuff that we've always relied on for steel making and metal products of all sorts and everything else got worked pretty hard during World War II. So that is what it is. The nickel belt, the iron belt, upper Midwest, the lead zinc belt in Missouri, places like that. I mean, we worked that really, really, really hard during World War II, but we still have stuff. And we're doing things, people are trying to recover more from waste. We have raw waste, mined waste. We have tailings. You just have to be really careful about how you do that. When you look at North America overall, well, let's say Canada, US, that's easier to talk about. Canada is hugely resource rich, and the Canadians are willing to extract, and they're willing to engage. But these are in beautiful places in Canada, so there's a lot of sensitivity around environmental protection, integrity, and we have Indigenous considerations, right? First Nations. What's going on in Canada with that is actually really interesting. It's really redefining a lot of thinking about access to resources, and it's influencing a lot of things in other countries because in their view, having gone through everything they've done to deal with their Aboriginal groups and all of their issues and interests is they are part of the game. They have to be part of the game. So we kind of had a pivotal event. I don't know if you know about the Trans Mountain Pipeline that everybody was trying to build.
Of course I know about it, but you should tell
Of course you know about it.
Yeah.
We're trying to move production, from Alberta oil sands out west to the West Coast.
Okay.
There was every reason in the world to get that pipeline built. There was a lot of opposition until the federal government, Mr. Trudeau, made an offer to the First Nations groups that they were struggling to negotiate with to include them. Kinder Morgan, an American company, was part of the pipeline. project backed away from that. It's now a Government of Canada project with equity,
Yeah.
Ownership for the First Nations groups. Once that happened, it's like been sort of a watershed event. Now we've got equity interests for First Nations in mining projects, finishing projects, other energy projects, and so on. This is catching on in Latin America. There's a lot of interest in this idea in Africa and other places where there have been a lot of sensitivities. It hasn't really hit home here on our tribal lands, but the question came up during the hearing today about land swaps. One of the potential land swaps would be tribal lands. Try to get the tribes to go along with this. Like there's a copper project in Arizona that people have been trying to reach a point of being able to move forward. This project has been around since I was in graduate school at Colorado School of Mines. So now I'm really dating myself. Like 1980s, people have been trying to figure out how to access this ore body. All 21 tribes in Arizona have something to say about it. There's like 15 of them that are actually part of the engagement group. And when you look at all the issues around that and you wonder, did anyone actually ask whether they'd like to participate?
Yeah, whether they'd want a monetary benefit from it.
Well, it's not just money. It's participation.
Yeah.
It's ownership. It's feeling like you have some control, For some groups, this just doesn't work at all. I mean, it's just,
No.
But for a lot of others, that's really what it's about is, if it's our lands or a sense that it's our lands, how rightly or wrongly, there are a lot of feelings about that. Is there a way to actually bring people in a meaningful way where they're part of the decision making and they're part of the development?
So I've heard about this particular project. I mean, is it really a project or is it just a site where there could be a project?
It is a very rich ore body. So back to your question about geology, in the world today, you look around the world and what we call ore grades. So this is the amount of metal that you can recover from the gangue rock, the rock matrix that it's in, and you're lucky to find ore grades above 1% for most stuff. An ore grade of like 3% is like really good. We still have 3% ore grades for lead zinc in Missouri. In net resolution in Arizona, the estimate is from testing and assaying and all of that is ore grades of around 3%.
Wow.
Maybe as high as 4%, but it's 1,500 feet to 3,000 feet underground. And you have the very complicated, situation with tribal lands. And as you look at the next wave, so beyond what's in operation today, and most of the stuff that's in operation today, about half of operating mines and facilities today across all of the metals everywhere are older than 1995, and that may not sound like much, but most of them are actually 1970s or they're 1960s or 1940s or 1800s. I mean, these things are hard to do, right? So you build a mine in it, it never actually stops operating. And when they do stop operating, you have other challenges. How are we going to decommission this? How are we going to manage it and everything else? So our big problem, the thing that I think that people don't understand, and we didn't have a chance to get into this today, is that everybody talks about how much we're going to need of all of this. And the idea is, we're going to open up new mines and, we'll capture additional material from these new mines. But we have to replace some of the older ones too. So we have to do two things. And then every place where we want to go, where the prospects look better, like Arizona, a higher ore grade, so less work to get that metal, there's always something else that's complicating. I mean, it's remote, it's far away, it's got no infrastructure, no access. Not everybody is on the same page politically in that location. I mean, it's a.
What's the story? You mentioned our steel industry and the Rust Belt, and what is this and how that was the height of mining there and producing was World War II out of necessity.
And our industrialization. So I mean, think about things. We're starting to build our first auto industry. We're building buildings, we're constructing, we're building roads, we're industrializing the country.
Well, I just think there's a lot of political narratives surrounding our steel industry and U.S. steel, and we have to import it from China, and that makes people upset.
Yes.
What's the What is the unemotional, apolitical story of the steel industry in America, and like since World War II, and how it got from there to where it is now? Is it a combination of just a number of factors, from Chinese dumping and bad trade practices to just simply running out?
It's a combination of factors. So when a mining area like the iron nickel belt, in the upper Midwest, when stuff gets old, well, the ore grades decline. So you've got that problem again. It costs more to operate, right? You have to work harder to get the metal.
You gotta dig deeper. You gotta
push harder,
break apart
process
more
more, all that kind of stuff. And at post-war, when back in the '60s, as countries are still starting to emerge, so all of the emerging markets that today are now established markets like Korea and so on, they start building their own facilities. So all of a sudden, you have new steel making capacity, new iron blast furnaces. All of this over there was newer and cheaper and state of the art and everything else. And meanwhile, over here we are with our older facilities, and we've been upgrading them and everything else. And they're not afraid to get what they need, right? So they pull in iron ore from wherever they get it. The world produces a lot of iron ore. Here we've had labor costs. We can't shy away from that. A lot of it is unionized labor contracting and all the issues associated with that. We had a slew of environmental regulations that impacted how these businesses operate.
Environmental regulations in the past 40 years are pretty different than they were in World War II.
Absolutely. We were.
Some of that's great.
And some of it's great, yes. I mean, we want the public interest to be protected, right? I mean, but it's the combination of those things, and also the way we tend to do it here. I mean, we talk about this all the time: command, control, blah blah blah, blah, layers of regulation. It becomes a lot. The compliance cost becomes a lot. It burdens older facilities. Companies, you hope that what companies would do is invest, in new equipment and other things to deal with. And to a large extent, whenever they can, they will. But when you've got cheaper producers abroad who can also sell more cheaply to your existing customers, and you're on the expensive side of the equation, it's tough.
Yeah, you don't have that. You're not going to get that capital to invest.
No,
in new
exactly.
things
And so in every one of our
10 years from
industries, absolutely, in every one of our industries, as we look, steel, aluminum, all the things where the U.S. was the largest producer, you see the same story playing out.
And as far as iron ore, when I was in Australia a couple weeks ago, and we talked about their trade wars with China, and what was interesting is trade wars for Australia mean it's different than a trade war with us because they export to China.
Almost entirely.
Yeah, almost entirely. And so when China has a quote unquote trade war with them, they stop buying their stuff. And it was interesting to hear the Australians, basically their after action report, let's call it. And the only ones that really heard it seemed to be were the wine growers, because China put tariffs on everything. And so because iron ore, they couldn't really tariff because, China's resource rich-ish, but they don't have nearly enough iron ore for their steel industry. So they need that from Australia. So Australia has them by the, on that at least. And the Australians are basically able to find other markets for the other stuff that they, like lobsters and there's a few other things I'm forgetting, beef. So good for Australia, not so good for their wine growers to a certain extent, but I'm sure plenty of markets for wine. I mean,
here, but
So, but it did hurt them. But I thought that was interesting. Whereas, when we look at a trade war with China, we're thinking of, imports of some of these things that, and again, what frustrates people is we probably could do it ourselves if we let ourselves do it, to some extent. But where is that true and where is that not true?
Right. Again, it kind of depends. It depends on the mineral, the metal, and
what metals are you most worried about when you look at the future, the next 10, 15 years?
I worry about everything, but I worry about hydrocarbons too. So I worry that we're underinvesting, and we've got this comfort level, with hydrocarbons. We're not going to need them anymore. We don't need to invest in them anymore. And you look at the state of the world, and it's like, hold on a second,
You got 50%.
This is not exactly true, and that's not something that we want to think about. 2030 rolls around, and we have an oil supply shock because of demand never actually went away. So there are certain things that, one of the things to distinguish is what's only an issue in the civilian arena, but what slops over to defense. So titanium, that's a biggie. Not one I worry about. Everybody worries about titanium. That's a really big one. Antimony came up today in the hearing. Well, and it's sad but true that we have to continue to make armaments. So that defense readiness
And where do we
is
get
there.
titanium from? Like, where's the?
Well,
how does that work?
Russia is a very big supplier of titanium, and so the first thing that happened after Ukraine was lots of worry in the aerospace and defense industries about titanium.
Now, excuse my ignorance. Is titanium something you make from other metals?
So think about state-of-the-art fighter aircraft, jet fighters.
I know what it is.
And then
is it an alloy or is it natural?
Well, so titanium. Well, it comes in different forms. We use alloys for almost everything. I mean, it's rare that we actually use a metal all by itself. Copper is an exception. And so titanium goes into, say, knee replacements. so that in fact, titanium is great because you've got this big, huge need for this product that works so beautifully. When you have to do something like that, it's a matter of health and needing to get that done. And then you've got titanium in other consumer products and vehicles, but then you've got this very important use in defense because the metal is really, really good for things
if we stop,
jet
so what
aircraft.
are the components of titanium that are in Russia, for instance?
So Russia has it produces a lot of titanium. They have the ores.
Titanium is actually a naturally occurring.
It occurs naturally, again, in different forms, but in an ore of different types that actually bears the titanium in the different forms, in different chemistries that occurs in that rock, to try to give you a simple explanation for it. And the Russians are very well endowed, and they've been the dominant supplier of titanium to the global market for a long time.
Does it exist anywhere else in large quantities?
It does, but not in large quantities. I mean, it's a peculiar element. And we have a lot of that in the periodic table and in the mix of things that people care about. We have a lot of those kinds of things. Platinum is another good one. So we worry about platinum a lot because the uses for platinum are almost endless. And one of the really big uses is for the hydrogen economy. Mm-hmm. And people have been trying to make this point. I've been trying, this is my third go round in my career on excitement about hydrogen, and it's the same stumbling blocks as before, and platinum is one of them. Yeah. It's a really enabling metal for moving electrons around in a fuel cell. It comes from South Africa. Mm-hmm. Platinum production in South Africa has been a case study in problems with labor, environmental management, and other things.
Well, the whole country's kind
it's
of
one of
when
it comes to the occurrence in the earth, platinum is at the top of the USGS list in terms of scarcity almost. And it's one of the really, truly scarce elements. So how do we do this? I mean, we recover platinum from catalytic converters in vehicles now. When a vehicle is fully retired, I mean, it's never going to get used again. It's going into the scrapyard. That's one of the first things that people do, is to recover the catalytic converters, and there are companies that are very, very good at extracting the platinum.
Yeah, easier to recover it from cars.
But it's not enough platinum for all the stuff that people are talking about trying to do. People want to fill the world up with electrolyzers to extract hydrogen from water, and one of the best materials for that is platinum.
Yeah, it was brought up today by one of the witnesses, which is because I think Democrats bring up, well, all we have to do is just recycle more. If we just recycled more, this wouldn't be a problem. And it was pointed out, well, it's not this either or. Demand is going up, way up.
Demand is going up for everything, and this is the thing. I don't even need. I mean, the thing that worries me is, So if you have an accelerated energy transition case, then things can get pretty worrying. But they're worrying anyway because remember we've got all these old mines and old facilities.
Even at the status quo.
Even at the status
it's worrisome.
quo, it's worrisome.
But if you're talking about this massive energy transition to wind and solar,
then
which
it gets crazy.
far more materials
Yes.
required. And
which goes to the question that you always ask, that you brought up again today, that we talked about before. Are we using these in the right things? That's what we really need an open conversation about.
Yeah.
If you're gonna rely on natural resources for things, don't you want to put them into sources of energy that are reliable and robust, and that you don't have all sorts of other problems that you have to solve?
right.
I have to say that during the month of May, when we had our stormy spring season, I was out of power for a week in Houston, so we had all our power outages. And I'm watching the news, and I'm looking at, damage to wind projects from tornadoes all over the place, Iowa, in Texas, Oklahoma, all over the place, damage to solar, utility scale solar projects all over the place from hail. And the argument for these, this is the irony. The argument for these is we're in danger of creating conditions that will lead to more extreme weather. These are claims that nobody can prove, right? In fact, it doesn't look like they hold water at all based on the best scientific analysis and information that we have. So we want to take my tax dollars, just speaking about myself, and deploy them to build out stuff in all of these places where it's vulnerable to all of the weather that everybody says is what we need to worry about.
The most vulnerable.
It doesn't really.
The most weather dependent.
We're going to
and
spend
vulnerable.
billions of dollars to build high voltage transmission to connect them to markets where everybody is going to be dependent on them, and then every spring they're going to go out.
And then the question
I
specifically.
don't get it. And then it all needs battery backup. And like I said on the committee today, the one problem with batteries that I encounter all the time, and it's strange the reactions I get from people. A battery is an energy customer, and people will look at you like, what?
You got to charge it.
You have to charge it. So on a power grid, you've got all our daily use of electricity with all of our daily peaks and seasonal peaks and everything else, right? Now you're going to add all of this stuff to it. So battery storage to back up the intermittent wind and solar that everybody wants, and then batteries to charge the EVs, because even though we can use the EVs to help offset, peak demand for electricity, the fact of the matter is everybody's going to plug in and want to charge their EVs so that they're fully charged when they need them and all that kind of stuff. So you're adding tremendous load to power systems.
And as it relates to the critical minerals conversation, my question to you, and we talked about this in the last podcast, is okay, so it takes, there's different numbers we could use. I think I quoted a stat in the hearing, which was this typical wind product, what do we call it, a wind farm or whatever. It's about 13 times more material.
Offshore is so intense.
Material than the same natural gas plant producing the same amount of energy. That's not an insignificant fact. That's a significant
It's
fact.
not an insignificant
And
fact,
so,
that's right.
and so that takes energy and emissions and just a whole bunch of things to create that much more material. And that's never included in the carbon footprint analysis. And I think that's my frustration, because I don't want to be just openly, make it seem like I'm openly against solar and wind and shilling for oil and gas.
There's a place for it.
But
there is a place for it.
Like there's the right
but
geography for it.
It's a gap filler. It's something that can help. Especially places where people don't have access to natural gas or something like that. They might have another resource that they
Or
can.
it's just so windy. It's just, there's some places that maybe it just makes sense.
But even in the windiest places, you have downtime. And that is what creates
That's what the Scots figured out, which is
drag
they
on the
thought
rest.
that they were just going to have 100% wind energy, and they had a lot less. Than
Well,
they thought
actually, I
before.
was digging around in maritime history not long ago because, before the steam engine came along, the great sailing ships were that was what we used for trade, right? So you had these economies, in Europe that were special, where people were specialized in building ships and making sails. Sail making was a big deal, right? And then it all goes away with the steam engine.
Yeah.
But what was the worst thing? The worst thing was you have all these days on water anyway, carrying cargo. It's really expensive, right? And then you have a doldrums event. My God, all of a sudden you have steam power and you have the ability to control your days on water. Why would you go back? And so we're facing the same issue as wind grows as a percentage of our generation capacity. It's a serious question. You know, how, and actually at the Baker Institute, my colleagues who you know Ken Medlock, and I don't know if you know Peter Hartley in the economics department, but they've done a great piece of work. They've taken all the ERCOT data and they show that even together, wind and solar combined, because people make that argument, if you combine them on grids, you can balance them out. You still have so much time when you have no resource.
Yeah, there's a vulnerability there. And then there's a real question as to how much.
And so to your footprint thing, not just to finish the thought real quick. So back to the amount of material you need for wind, as you brought up in the committee meeting, we have, I think it's around 6,000 gas turbines operating that could provide, if we use them, half of electric power, on a reliable basis. We have 77,000 wind turbines installed onshore, lower 48. And they, on average, and this is a wild average because this, again, the question is what's on and what's producing and what's off, 8%. Yeah. 77,000.
That's the crux
it's
of it.
It's going to take millions.
To put it in layman's terms, like you're building a lot of things to get a lot less out of it. And we have to take a step back and say, does that make a lot of sense?
Does it make a lot of sense? And then, the domino effect is, well, we're going to have battery storage. Well, now we have to figure out, okay, well, how much batteries, storage capacity are we going to need? Well, it's orders of magnitude above the 13 times,
that's a lot.
Relationship.
And building batteries these modern batteries is
exactly
no small feat. Requires like 500,000 pounds of earth moved.
And that's just the United States.
Yeah. So it begs the question about just trade-offs. And
and this is not to say that there aren't issues with our hydrocarbons, with coal, but there's a lot of ways of rethinking what we do with all of that.
Yeah. You spoke briefly about seabed mining. So what are we mining on seabeds, and what does that look like exactly? What could we do?
There's two types of currencies for a whole bunch of reasons: depth and weight of water, and kind of how stuff interacts with the minerals-rich seafloor. Anyway, we have what's called nodules.
Yeah.
And the nodules are extremely rich.
Yeah.
So
there's like these little balls.
On the they look
seafloor.
like pebbles when you look at all the photos that people have taken.
You just got to go pick them up.
Well, yes, you just have to basically pick them up, and because they're 99%, 99.9 almost percent metal, that's hardly any processing. You just deliver it to your metals customer almost.
So what's the problem here? It seems like
so
a big
there's
win.
that, and then just for completeness, there are what we call seamount crusts. So different occurrences of metals in places where you have heat, thermal heat, hot water, thermal heat heating the seawater. And again, interacting, and you're concentrating minerals, and those are manganese-rich locations. So what's the problem? Well, people worry about impacts to sea life. Of course, at 1,500 feet, am I right about that? It's 1,500 feet or meters, I forget. But anyway, there's not much sea life to really worry about. I mean, we're talking about a pretty sparse ecosystem. The deep sea floor is not where the richness in marine environment is.
There could be aliens down there. That's what Tucker That's what Tucker Carlson said. So he said we have data and proof. I don't know. What do I know?
No. You have to be careful of, between the sea surface and the sea floor, you've got a lot of activity.
Yeah.
Pelagic, as we call them, populations. Fish.
Sure.
Of all types, mammals of all types that use the pelagic regions.
But
these are still far away from where the real rich areas are, which are closer to, the coastal environments where you have you have more sunlight, and so now you've got, kelp and algae production that can sustain a lot more biodiversity than you can as you go into the deeper ocean. So the current technology is to basically extract the nodules by pulling up material, almost vacuuming it up, People have worked to improve the technology so that you're disturbing a minimal amount of substrate. Everyone worried about plumes. So as you're moving this seabed that has been in this state forever, and doesn't get stirred up very much, that you would be suffocating communities, benthic communities, with dirt, with sediment from the plumes. But a lot of work has been done on that, and people are comfortable that, in fact, that doesn't happen very much.
So is it being done anywhere?
So it's being tested. There have been pilots, the successful extraction with pilots. It's the full offshore kit. So everything that we've done forever to pursue offshore oil and gas, I mean, the technology that has been developed around this, if we don't use it, we're stupid, to tell you the truth. Everything from navigational assistance to, the fabrication of vessels themselves, just everything.
What created these little metal nodules?
Well, so there are a lot of theories about it. I mean, like I said, you've got the weight of this tremendous weight of water. It's cold. You have minerals in the environment anyway, in the sediment, in the water column. I mean, seawater has stuff in it, and it's dropped out, and just as best everyone thinks, the weight of the water, the stillness of the environment for prolonged periods of time, and other things just caused the nodules to congeal the way they do.
And what are we looking for in there? Like what's in there?
So nickel has been for the nodules. Nickel is the target. So that solves the nickel problem. And the crust, manganese is the target. That solves the manganese problem. We get cobalt, copper, other stuff.
That'd be good, because right now cobalt's just mined from kids in the Congo.
Yeah, well, yes.
It's a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
And how many places around the globe do we assess that there might be these seabed floors full of?
So really it's everywhere. Everywhere where you have margins, where you've had interesting places. Again, remember, a lot of this stuff comes originally in Earth history from volcanic igneous activity, right? So places where you've had rifts and vents and stuff like that to
spews things
that get into the seawater column that eventually get into the resource. So there is an area called the Clipperton. I'm having a senior moment. Clipperton Clarion Zone, which is under the United Nations management, and that's that's the big problem. Anybody looking at that big part of the Pacific, you have to deal with the UN, and the problem there is the political pressure on the UN, on the International Seabed Authority, to not allow development. But a lot of countries have territorial waters that have occurrences. And so some of the ventures that we've looked at are actually in the Cook Islands, experimenting there. Really good results, really interesting prospects. We've got stuff here, offshore Atlantic, some in the Gulf Coast, all the continental margins,
And considering we already drill there for oil,
considering
I
we
think
already drill there,
somewhat an easy lift, you would think. But regulatorily speaking, I don't know if this is exactly your area, but is there any low-hanging fruit that we would want to change from the federal level to make?
It's actually the Interior has already been working on this. So the Bureau of BOEM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, has been part of the UN dialogue. They've been looking at what to do. There's actually stuff on paper about what if you want to prospect off coast Atlantic, which is where the prospects are best. They've got rules. They've got licenses. There are existing. I think it was actually a NOAA kind of a licensing program that kind of got blended into other things, but there were some initial NOAA licenses that people might be able to claim are U.S. governance outside of the UN, in the UN's area. But,
we're pretty much out of time, and I'm going to go vote soon. But okay, man, I do have one kind of interesting bonus question, conspiratorial even, but we'll save that for here in a minute. This was an interesting one. I think this was maybe from your testimony. What are some of the new materials that are being developed that maybe reduce our dependence on hard to obtain stuff?
That's actually my favorite
carbon nanotube
topic.
fibers and new battery chemistries. I mean, are there better batteries on the horizon?
Yes, there are better batteries on the horizon. And shock and awe, a lot of them will use carbon in some form. Right now, as it is, every battery has graphite because graphite's very enabling in terms of, again, moving electrons around, which is what a battery does. As you know, we at Rice University is one of the places where carbon nanotubes were discovered. Over the years of testing and developing and all of that, we've reached a point in our labs and now through a spin out, and there are other institutions that have been working on this where we've got a product that can be commercialized. And if you were to look at it, and I have some that would be fun to show you sometime. It's like black thread. So you look at like a larger diameter black thread. It's a string, and you look at that, and it's like, oh, what is this? Well, it turns out to be as strong as steel. So I've seen tests where that sample, that black string, will suspend a 50-pound weight and transmit electricity at the same time without overheating. We use carbon fiber already, right? So the vehicles that are in the market now are advanced composites. A lot of that has carbon fiber in it, especially the higher end vehicles, aircraft. So the ability to bring this material in for both wire and cable, which takes care of a lot of the demand for copper and aluminum for electric power applications.
And is it easier to produce a carbon nanotube than it is to mine a bunch of copper and make it into wires?
In my opinion, it is.
Yeah.
That's my honest opinion, yes.
Why?
We can source the carbon from a lot of different places. We can build this within the existing oil and gas industry footprint. We could build it within the existing coal footprint. And just people have been trying to figure out what else to use.
Is it a petroleum-based product? Like what is a carbon nanotube?
It's carbon.
Carbon.
All petroleum is carbon in different combinations with oxygen, nitrogen, and other stuff, right?
Okay.
So this is just pure carbon at the atomistic level. And with high heat lasers, it forms a buckyball. So this is the first, thing that people discovered was, these carbon atoms kind of arrange themselves in an interesting way when you shoot a laser at it. Well, it turns out that you can make a sheet of that, graphene. It's not very stable. You can roll it up into a tube, and now it is stable, and now you've got something that can become really important as a fiber. Yeah. I can mix it in with other things. I could add it to steel making for steel rebar. I can even replace steel rebar with it. People are experimenting with it in concrete. We can put it into fabrics. So Kevlar, this is the next generation of safety.
You can finally get a John Wick
bulletproof suit. We will finally get a John Wick suit.
Okay.
Yes. So you look at the dollars that we're trading around here, and it's like, okay, we're having all these fights, and we're trying to figure out how to do all this stuff, but why don't we just skip all that? Most days, this is my question. Why don't we just skip all of that and leapfrog it and just go to the advanced materials that we're going to need to have anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the biggest problems with an electric vehicle is weight. It's tons and tons of weight that get added because of.
So how do we skip it? Is there an investment that needs to happen?
Yes, there's an investment that needs to happen.
How would that flesh that out?
Well, there are slowly some conversations going on about that. There actually is a DOE interest finally, in trying to figure out, because the ARPA-E has funded a lot of the early work, right? So, but now you need to get it to scale. although people are coming in to start looking at how to invest to get it to scale. You know, in a
It's
variety.
scalability problem. And
Yeah, I
there's
mean,
still
it's
some
just
manufacturing costs and all that.
this is it. Yes, this is it. But based on recent work by several different groups that are in the business of either making the carbon nanotubes directly or taking carbon nanotubes and turning them into stuff.
So there are some companies trying to commercialize it.
They are, and what they're seeing is, wow, the path to reducing the cost is steeper than everybody thought, on the good side. So there's been this magic thing, carbon fiber, which is very, there's a lot of baggage around carbon fiber because of how it's produced. So in the aviation industry, aerospace industry, for instance, people are really hung up about that. Is it sustainable, blah, 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 blah. So now you have something that is sustainable, that you can develop through a variety of different processes and different sources and everything else. The magic number for carbon fiber that everyone's talked about was like $12 a kilogram, and can we get it down to $5? And it looks like on the carbon nanotubes, we can get to $5 right now, which would beat copper. Aluminum is closer in price. Steel, high quality steel,
Yeah.
a whole array of stuff.
And it's a good conductor.
Yes, as it can conduct electricity like copper. Yep, and it's a good thermal conductor, and it's the strength that's the interesting thing.
Right.
People in experimenting with it, it has the same properties as steel, but it's flexible too. So that's kind of an interesting
that's cool.
thing to think about. Oh, it's very cool.
That's how you get a Batman suit right there.
Yes, you can get your Batman suit.
All right, Michelle, thanks so much for coming on again. Appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, bonus question, conspiracy on how much do you think about how the pyramids were built?
Well,
This is a materials question.
well, yeah, but I mean, people figured it out, didn't they?
Somebody figured it out, but I'm not so sure I believe. So I have a lot of trouble. I was there a couple of years ago, and we see the unfinished obelisk, and I'm like, how did they cut this?
Yes.
And they're like,
And move it. That's
Yeah,
the
and
big
I'm like-
mystery.
and they're like,
Everybody
they-
struggled with the moving
so
it around.
in granite, there's I think Dannerite. Is that accurate? There's like these little waves of Dannerite. They're like they took out the Dannerite's harder than the granite, so they got that out, made tools from it, and then cut the granite. And I'm like, no way. I'm like, well, how did they cut out the Dannerite? Nobody knows this. Anyway, I'm wondering how often you think about this, because I think about it a lot. And it drives me
I
crazy.
can't say that I've thought about that particular thing, but I've had weird thouts myself about other stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know
It's
how
just-
they're moving these big blocks. and
Yeah,
all
how
that.
did they
There-
actually do that?
I think they had technology we're not giving them credit for.
And then did the Mayans and the Aztecs, everybody end up doing the same thing? That's the really interesting puzzle.
Yeah. A lot of similarities between these.
Yeah, a lot of
supposedly
similarities.
unconnected
And nobody had
civilizations.
cell phones to like compare notes.
No, well, maybe they did.
Or
You know
maybe they
what?
did.
Who knows? Who knows? So,
Those aliens again, they came out
yeah.
from the deep sea and
yeah.
told
And
everybody
they,
what
yeah,
to
and
do.
then they put all these nodules down there. So,
On that note, that's not going to be in the podcast, will
it
it?
could be. Yeah. It could be. It's the bonus round. They got to pay extra.
Right, if they
So.
make it all the way to the end.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
You bet.
was
Happy
fun.
to do it.
Of course.
Always happy to do it.